President Biden says the U.S. will not send Ukraine F-16 fighter jets in its fight against Russia. Ukraine renewed requests for the warplanes after successfully securing tanks from the U.S. and Germany. But Mr. Biden is, at least for now, standing firm on the fact that the U.S. will not directly send jets into the war. His reluctance comes despite reports that Department of Defense officials are pushing to send Ukraine F-16. Former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Ivo Daalder, joins me now. He currently serves as president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Ambassador Daalder, if U.S. defense officials and the Ukrainians think fighter jets would help, remind us again why President Biden is refusing.
Well, President Biden has made very clear that he has two fundamental objectives. Number one is to do whatever we can to help the Ukrainians to defend themselves against this brutal, unprovoked, and completely illegal attack and invasion by the Russians. But secondly, to try to do so in a way that does not risk a direct military confrontation between the United States and Russia, between NATO and Russia. And he's made very clear that weapon systems with ranges that can strike deep into Russian territory, which is what the F-16s, of course, could do, are, at least up till now, a bridge too far.
But it felt like earlier, it didn't feel like, the administration was saying earlier a similar thing on tanks and on Patriot missiles. Now, I take your point about those are different weapons than those that can strike inside Russia. But they did, for a long time, resist on Patriots and on tanks, and then finally the dam broke, and that they are now being sent, and the Ukrainians are being trained. So do you expect a change on this one, too?
Well, perhaps. I mean, clearly the line is constantly being assessed about where to draw between what we will provide and what we won't provide. And that line has shifted. I mean, we were, in the beginning of the war, only providing so-called defensive weapons, Stinger and Javelin anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles. That has all gone out of the window with more artillery, longer range artillery, and now, as you mentioned, tanks. And so we may come to the point that the president decides that he will take the risk of a Russian response by providing longer range missiles and or these aircraft. But when you're sitting in the Oval Office, you would presumably want to have someone who actually takes some time to see where that balance needs to be struck. And it's a constant balance, and it will evolve. I would also say that the opposition, in particular to Patriots and the M1A tanks that are now been sent, was more about logistical and training capabilities than it was about the nature of the systems themselves. That said, I think every day and every week and every month, the president and his team will be sitting in the Oval Office trying to figure out how can we help Ukraine, but do so in a way that does not risk a direct confrontation between us and the Russians.
And how helpful would F-16s be in both the abstract, but also maybe at where the fight is right now?
So, I mean, F-16s could be very helpful. Clearly, in a offensive operation that is being contemplated by sending not only the tanks, but also large numbers of infantry fighting vehicles, more longer-range artillery and missiles, and the kind of training that we are now providing to the Ukrainians and so-called combined arms training that is happening in Germany over the past month, that sort of package of capabilities could be enhanced by having air power that can strike a little deeper and a little further beyond the front line in order to provide the offensive capabilities for the armors that we have now sent. So clearly they could help. They could also help in providing additional air defense capabilities against drones and missiles that are flying slow, or cruise missiles, and that have been attacking Ukrainian cities throughout the country.
As a diplomat, help me understand, A, if there is a cost to resistance for some kinds of weapons that then goes away, if there's a cost for that, or if just the opposite is true, which is that, at least on the case with the tanks, it was a kind of, we've all got to grab hands and go together, and that, in fact, this is not just about what's useful in the battlefield, but there's also a diplomatic component, which has to do with how other countries move and how they all kind of move in sync.
Yeah, I tend to think that that this go, no go, and then go kind of debate that we're having is not particularly helpful. And I think a more coherent set of strategies that lays out, here's what we're willing to do and how far we do, is probably better. At the same time, I think, as you rightly underscore, the Biden administration and the president himself have been very, very clear that they really want to work together with our allies, and that while the U.S. is willing to lead that effort and to try to get others to come with us, it's also important that we make sure that they come with us. It's not just who's driving the car when it comes to leadership; it's who's in the back seat. And clearly, on the issue of fighter jets, we're not there yet. We have some countries that have suggested that they're open to this, but others who have said, no, that's something that we're really not contemplating in the moment. And so building up that coalition and making sure that everybody moves together has been very important to send Vladimir Putin a singular message. We are going to be with the Ukrainians, and there's nothing you can do to divide us. The one thing that could divide us is if this war escalates, and that's in a way that no one wants. And that, I think, the president is paying attention to and saying, perhaps not right now.
Ambassador Ivo Daalder, we're always grateful when you're with us. Thank you so much.